everyone, and I thank you guys so much for tuning in to yet another episode of My Orchid Adventures with me, Maria Young. So in today's episode, I'm going to be showing you exactly how to propagate in a much more unorthodox manner. And when I say unorthodox, I mean we are going to be doing these propagations without any type of Keiki paste, and in this method, we are not going to have to make any types of cuttings at all. So for those of you that do not like to use unnatural chemicals, and for those of you that don't like to put any permanent damages to your orchids, this is going to be absolutely fabulous for you guys. So if you guys have been watching my videos, you guys know that I've been attempting to create even more spikes off of our Phalaenopsis and also our Psychopsis orchids. But what's fabulous with the method that I'm using, you can also use it to create Keikis. And a viewer and also a friend by the name of Bridget Goodens had asked exactly how can we do it to promote Keikis. So Bridget, I can show you better than I can tell you. So we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do it right now. Bam, 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 and boom. But before we begin, let me go ahead and explain to you further exactly what these propagations are all about, just so we have a better understanding. So as we all know, our orchids have secondary means of producing spikes, keikis, and root growth. And they do it via dormant growth points. Now these dormant growth points are actually only there as an emergency backup system, just in case an emergency happens with the orchid where it feels as if it may not survive, such as an extreme injury happens to the orchid or it becomes deathly ill. And in this case, it would trigger these normally dormant growth points to become active and then to produce whatever the orchid needs it to produce, either keikis or the actual spike. And in both cases, it is trying to prolong and sustain its livelihood either through the new growth or through the seeds of the orchids. And let us just take a brief look throughout my garden and see if we can find any type of emergency respondents. And look here guys, I do think we found one. And right here is an example of an emergency response to an emergency situation. And as you see right here, the top portion of this orchid has completely died out. This was affected by the frost that we received, a month or two ago. And as you can see right here though, folks, let's take a closer look. You are definitely seeing nubbins that are coming out, and they are potential keikis right here. So again, emergency response to an emergency situation. And if we take a close look right here, this is the same situation. As you can see, this died out due to the frost, and you can see that new growth now coming from there. So indeed, this is a form and a strategy for this orchid to survive. And right here, folks, this poor japonica right here was accidentally left in the sun. As you can see, there are some sunburns and also some extreme dehydration. You're noticing some severe wilting in the leaves, and indeed, this has suffered. And because this orchid has suffered majorly, it did trigger an emergency response. And indeed, now you're seeing this keiki that is growing, also another keiki right here that is growing. And if we take an even closer look, there's a keiki that is beginning to grow. And even right here, there's a tiny growth point that is beginning to come out. So there might be fourth keiki coming up. So that is what this decided to do in response to that emergency or extreme condition, and again, in effort to survive and maintain its livelihood. And here is something rather unusual about this catasetum right here. Can you see it? Let's take a closer look. And if you can see, there is one new growth right there, two new growth right there, three new growth right there, four new growth right there. And if we look right here, there appears to be the fifth one right here coming out as well. So 5 growths on one catasetum. So indeed, that is something unusual, right? So what could be happening to this orchid? Well, in a case like this, when you see something that is not normal, there might be an issue. And if we take a look right here, this orchid or this bulb appears to be having some sort of serious infection, because indeed it is beginning to discolor and rot away at the tip. So that is why this has responded to this emergency and indeed has thrown off all of these new growths. So what we're actually doing with our propagation method is we are simulating an emergency in hopes that the orchid would actually respond to the emergency by throwing off keikis and growing more plants. And that is how we propagate our orchids. So in vandas, what we are looking for is a good size and very mature vanda that is capable of producing its keikis. Now in this one in particular, you are seeing that it does have a stem portion. And that is because as the orchid actually ages, it grows from the top. And at the bottom, the older leaves will actually fall off and leaving this stem portion right here, which is great for the propagation method. Now what you may have to do before you begin is actually remove these dried areas right here that appear to be sheaths, but they're actually remnant from the old leaves that have already fallen off. So we're going to go ahead and remove all of this sheath-like material so that we can see underneath, and we can see the joints and also what I like to call the ring around the orchids, and we can find the possible growth points underneath so we know exactly what we're working with. Now on vandas, the actual keikis will grow on the inner axil of the leaf. So look on the side where the leaves are coming out for the growth point that can be possibly a keiki in the future. And by golly, Miss Molly, we have found one right here. So as you can see, this is a potential growth point, and all we're doing is taking the twisty tie, we're going to put it around it. Remember, whatever node or ring around the orchid that we're working with, we always want to go above it. So in this case, that is the node that we're working with. We are going above it, and we're going to go ahead and try to secure this as tight as possible, because stems of this vanda right here is very, very hardy. So we're trying to twist this as tight as we can, put as much pressure as we can to simulate somewhat of an emergency so that it can go ahead and throw off this keiki. And once you have it as tight as you can get it, voila, you are absolutely done. Now it's just the waiting game. And what is so fantastic about this propagation method is the fact that you are not going to be creating a permanent injury to the actual orchid. In this case, we are creating the emergency situation, but just as soon as we see the orchid growing its keikis and the roots producing and it looks like it can sustain itself, well then we can literally take off the twisty tie and then that orchid will grow as normal yet again. So what kind of other orchids can we do this with? Well, any orchid that you can actually use the propagation method where you're making cuttings, you can absolutely do it with. Like your Dendrobium nobiles, they are good for this method. Also, if you notice that they do have a ring around the orchid, as I like to call it, or these joints, then indeed you can do it as well on those types of orchids. And also, if you notice that keikis can grow on those rings as well, then indeed those are the kind of orchids that you can use this method on. And yes, indeed, the vanilla plants as well. You can definitely use this method on the vanilla plant. Because if we take a close look at the inner part of the leaf area, this is the axil, you are actually going to find those nodes right in the center right there. Can you see that? And that is actually a node that can become either a vanilla flower eventually, or it can actually be another part of the vine that grows where it will branch off. As in this case right here, these are two leaves, and on one you see that this actually has grown into another vine, and it just goes up on that little post there. And then on the other side you are actually seeing another growth that came out of the axil of this leaf. And if we take a look, oh me oh my, can you see what that is? That is actually a vanilla bean right there. So indeed, when you have those growth points or those nodes, you can use that propagation method as well. And what I did forget to mention with this Dendrobium nobile right here, I did attempt to do the twisty tie method, I would say about a month ago. And if we take a look at it now, here is the twisty tie. And oh me, oh my, do you see what I'm seeing right there? And if we also take a look over here as well, I don't know how clear it is, but there's also a new growth that is beginning to come up right there as well. So 2 new growths right here. And again, this appears to have worked, so yay for the twisty tie method. Now with this orchid right here, I will have to tell you, it is quite hardy, quite thick and stiff, so you are going to have to get that twisty tie as tight as possible on this cane right here in order for it to work. And those are just a few examples of some of the orchids that we can indeed propagate through this method. Now I do have to tell you that this method is not 100% guaranteed, as in no method of propagation is absolutely 100% guaranteed. Of course, you know, there's a lot of elements along with conditions of the atmosphere and also conditions of the orchid and the fact that orchids absolutely do what they want to do. All of those things come into play, and I actually believe that using Keiki paste and actually making cuttings is a more potent method of creating Keikis. But again, this is an alternative method if you don't want to go that route. And there you have it, folks. That is an orchid propagation via twisty tie method wrap. And I also want to know from you guys, what did you guys think about this method? Also, if you guys have tried a method similar or perhaps not even so similar and it's worked, please be sure to share it with us and post those comments below. And of course, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And also, if you want to follow me on Facebook, I'm there at My Orchid Adventures. If you want to write or send me something, you can do it at the address below. And I am also on eBay selling some phenomenal orchids, so visit me there as well. I will post that link in the description below. And as you guys already know, I do truly love you guys all. Mwah.